Hello everyone and welcome to the 2013 edition of A Comprehensive History of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. 2013 would start with an immediate pack release. Cosmo Blazer would release on January 25th and would release a new meta archetype to the game. Fire Fist was a control deck focusing on the Beast Warrior typing. Fire Fist monsters would have effects that interacted with continuous spells and traps, while the deck's spell and trap support would focus on searching, summoning, and strengthening the monsters. Brotherhood of the Fire Fist Bear is a level 4 Fire Beast Warrior monster with 1600 attack and 1200 defense. Once per turn, when this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can set one Fire Formation spell directly from your deck. Once per turn, you can send one face-up Fire Formation spell/trap you control to the graveyard, then target one monster on the field. Destroy that target. This type of effect would form the basis of the Fire Fist playstyle, with Fire Fist Gorilla having the same effect but for destroying spells and traps. These effects would be enabled by spell cards such as Fire Formation Tenki. When this card is activated, you can add one level 4 or lower Beast Warrior monster from your deck to your hand. All Beast Warrior monsters you control gain 100 attack. You can only activate one Fire Formation Tenki per turn. Tenki wasn't just a searcher for the archetype, it was a searcher for the entire Beast Warrior typing, putting it on the level of reinforcement of the army. With the combination of Tenki and Bear, Fire Fist players would have the common opening play of activating Tenki, searching Bear, summoning Bear, destroying an opponent's monster, attacking directly, and then playing another Fire Fist card from deck such as Fire Formation Tensu, a card that would allow them to use an extra normal summon to set up their Exceed plays. The deck would also do something that very few Sexal era archetypes have done to this point, and that is support synchro plays, with Brotherhood of the Fire Fist Spirit being the archetype's tuner. The consistency of the Fire Fist archetype would see it become an immediate meta contender. There was a very low chance of you bricking on this deck. It wasn't just new archetypes in this pack either. Cosmo Blazer would also see support for older archetypes. Mermails would get a massive boost by the inclusion of Mermail Abysteus. You can discard one of the water monsters of the graveyard, special summon this card from your hand. When summoned this way, you can add one level 4 or lower Mermail monster from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Mermail Abysteus once per turn. This card was a game changer for the deck. If you opened Abysteus and Atlantean Dragoons, you could discard Dragoons, summon Tius, and then search off both Dragoons and Tius at the same time, getting 2 new cards to your hand. This put the deck on another level, and made it one of the most consistent rank 7 decks in the game. Several generic staples were also included in Cosmo Blazer. Crimson Blader had finally found its way into the TCG from the 5Ds anime. This level 8 Fire Warrior Synchro monster had 2800 attack and 2600 defense, and an effect that reads, 1 tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner monsters. If this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, your opponent cannot normal or special summon level 5 or higher monsters during their turn. Now, Crimson Blader wasn't a catch-all for all decks, as it didn't stop Exceed plays, but it did stop decks like Mermail that regularly went into high-level monsters, making this a very, very good option to stop certain decks. Diamond Dire Wolf was an Earth rank 4 beast monster with 2000 attack and 1200 defense. It required 2 level 4 monsters. Once per turn, you can detach one Exceed material from this card, then target one Beast, Beast Warrior, or Ringed Beast type monster you control, and one other card on the field. Destroy them. The beautiful thing about Diamond Dire Wolf is not only did it support the new Fire Fist archetype and became a must in that deck, but you could use it in anything and just target itself. Either way, you were getting mileage out of this card. Finally, we have the trap card Breakthrough Skill. Target one face-up effect monster your opponent controls. That face-up monster your opponent controls has its effect negated until the end of this turn. During your turn, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one face-up monster your opponent controls. That target has its effects negated until the end of this turn. This card was an absolute game changer. It basically power crept Fiendish Chain. Yeah, it was only for 1 turn, but you only ever needed to negate an opponent's monster for 1 turn to get mileage out of it. And being able to use it again by banishing it from your graveyard, that was just an amazing effect that was really pushing the boundaries of what you could do with trap cards in this game. In a way, Breakthrough Skill was the first truly modern trap card, as very few trap cards to this point had graveyard effects like this. Shortly following Cosmo Blazer would be the release of the Onslaught of Fire King structure deck and the Sexal Collection tin. The Fire Kings worked well as their own deck, but they also merged well with Flamfells, Fire Fist, and other fire archetypes. The Sexal Collection tin wasn't massively impactful, but it did bring us number 51 Fulcosaurus to the game, an Exceed monster that could just easily clear your opponent's monsters from the board and inflict burn damage, a nice inclusion to any extra deck that could go into rank 5 plays. On the competitive side of things, we would see YCS Miami be run by Travis Smith's Windup deck. Windups has ended 2012 as one of the best decks, and they continued that form into 2013. The two key cards in this were the anti-meta staples of Thunder King Ryo and Dimensional for sure. Both of these cards were very good at shutting down rival decks. Unfortunately for Windups, this would be the last time they ever topped a major tournament like this. The March 2013 Forbidden Unlimited list would see to that, with Windup Carrier Semighty being banned, Sangam being banned, and Windup Magician being limited to 1. This ban list would kill the deck immediately. Without Semighty, the deck could not make its full plays and get full card advantage. While it would be easy to say that Konami was simply going after the Windup deck to just take it out of the meta, there is a case that Semighty needed to go because of the existence of the Windup hand loop. However, many people have argued that Semighty was the wrong card to hit, and that it was Windup Hunter that should have been banned, as Hunter was the card that was actually discarding the opponent's hand to begin with. The fact of the matter is, it was probably both factors. Konami wanted the hand loop gone, and they didn't want Windup to be the top deck anymore. Even so, it's a little extreme that Windup Carrier Semighty remains banned to this day. It has been unbanned in the OCG for a number of years now, but as of 2023, it remains forbidden in the TCG. Other changes to the list included the limiting of One Day of Peace and Solemn Warning, the semi-limiting of Tsukiyomi, Thunder King Ryo and Advanced Ritual Art, and finally the unlimiting of Kalut, Spore, Lumina, Shien Smoke Signal, and Mind Crush. Post-ban list we would see a brief return of Dino Rabbit as a top contender, with YCS Santiago being run by a build that ran 14 different cards in the side deck. Things would quickly change however, as the impact of Cosmo Blazer would finally be felt at YCS Austin. Oscar Soleil Jr. would ride the new Mermail support all the way to first place. With 3 copies of Diva, Dragoons, and Abyss Teus, this was Mermail at full power. YCS Lil would also be taken by Mermail, with Long Dao winning what is one of the more amusing tournament-winning builds. A popular tech in Mermail at the time was Gen X Undyne. Undyne being able to send Dragoons as cost directly from the deck was a massive boon, but it came with the drawback of having to run Gen X Controller, a level 3 vanilla tuner that would brick in your hand. Some players found the trade-off worth it, as Undyne could be a powerful asset to the deck. Dao, however, had clearly seen Gen X Controller in his hand one too many times, as he opted to run a staggering 53 cards in his deck, just to reduce the chance of him drawing Controller. Regardless, it ended up working out for him. Moving into April, we would see YCS Costa Rica be taken by Jorge Valverde and his Hero Bubble Beat deck. There wasn't anything particularly revolutionary about this deck, and Heroes had been a solid contender for the past 2 years. Every now and then, however, a hero play would make the correct meta calls and be able to ride the deck to first place. With such a small monster count, retention was an important factor in the deck building. A hero loves Emergency Call, and 3 copies of the Warrior Returning Alive would see to it that players would always get their heroes back. Releasing at the end of April would be Hidden Arsenal 7, Night of the Stars. This would be the last booster release in the Hidden Arsenal series, and boy did it sure go out with a high. The power level of this set really pushed the game forward, and there is a lot to go over. Starting with Gem Knight Seraphonite. This Earth Fairy fusion monster had 2300 attack and 1400 defense. For materials, it required 1 Gem Knight monster plus 1 Light monster. Must be fusion summoned with the above fusion materials. During your main phase, you can normal summon / set 1 monster in addition to your normal summon / set. You can only gain this effect once per turn. One of the best effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is getting a second normal summon. You're only supposed to have one for a reason. Seraphonite wouldn't be a meta contender straight away, but the Gem Knight deck had plenty of ways of making it easily. This card would see a lot of play over the years. More immediately significant, however, would be Lafarval Chain. This level 4 Fire Sea Serpent, check out that type pairing, had 1800 attack and 1000 defense. It was a rank 4 monster that required 2 level 4 monsters. Once per turn, you can detach 1 Exceed material from this card to activate one of these effects. Send 1 card from your deck to the graveyard, choose 1 monster from your deck and place it on top of your deck. Foolish Burial was at 1 for a very good reason, and yet Konami saw it fit to make a toolbox Foolish Burial that you could access at any time. This card would see play immediately, and it would only get better over time. The Gusto archetype would get a new Exceed monster in the form of Daigusto Emerald. 2 level 4 monsters. Once per turn, you can detach 1 material from this card, then activate one of these effects. Target 3 monsters in your graveyard, shuffle all 3 into the deck, then draw 1 card. Target 1 non-effect monster in your graveyard, special summon that target. Despite being a Gusto card, this card actually saw very little play in Gustos, but it did see play in every single deck in the game that could do rank 4 spamming. To this day, it is one of the best rank 4 monsters ever made, just because of its ability to generate card advantage. A big part of the Hidden Arsenal set was the Evil Swarm archetype. This archetype would consist of corrupted versions of previous Hidden Arsenal monsters. It would be heavily focused on Exceeds, but we only really need to talk about one, the card that made the deck a massive contender almost entirely on its own. Evil Sworn Ophion. This rank 4 Dark Dragon monster has 2550 attack and 1650 defense. It requires 2 level 4 L-Swarm monsters. Now let's just talk about what L-Swarm means. Evil Swarm and the Steel Swarm archetypes are actually the same archetype. In Japan they were known as Furs and Infers, meaning that in the OCG, it required 2 Furs monsters to summon. Due to localization, they decided to call it Swarm instead, which is why we have the L-Swarm moniker. While this card has Exceed material, level 5 or higher monsters cannot be special summoned. Once per turn, you can detach 1 Exceed material from this card, add 1 Infestation spell/trap from your deck to your hand. In short, Evil Sworn Ophion was powerful because not only was it a floodgate effect that stopped the likes of mermails, but the card was also capable of searching spell and trap support that would protect it from destruction and removal. Evil Swarm wouldn't be a top tier contender, but it'd be a very strong rogue deck just because of the amount of things it could gatekeep. The lore rivals to Evil Swarm would be the Constellars, and the Constellar archetype would see very heavy support in Hidden Arsenal 7. Best of all were its Exceed monsters, starting with Constellar Pallades. This rank 5 light warrior monster has 2500 attack and 1500 defense. It requires 2 level 5 light monsters. Once per turn, during either player's turn, you can detach 1 material from this card, then target 1 card on the field, return that target to the hand. This card was exceptional and would see play for years to come. Being able to bounce your opponent's cards is one of the best forms of removal in the game, but being able to do it on either player's turn as a quick effect, that just put it on another level. Pairing with Pallades would be Constellar Foretell-Me M7, a card that you think would be a rank 7 because of its name, but is actually a rank 6. This machine monster had 2700 attack and 2000 defense, required 2 level 6 monsters. But you could also Exceed summon this card by using a Constellar Exceed monster you control as a material. If summoned this way, the following effects cannot be activated this turn. Once per turn, you can detach 1 material from this card, and target 1 monster on the field or in either graveyard. Return that target to the hand. For Constellars, it would be a simple strategy. Bounce a card on your turn, bounce a card on your opponent's turn, then rank Pallades into Foretell-Me, and then bounce a card the turn after. Being able to rank up like this made it very easy for Constellars to outproblem cards. It could bounce anything strong, and then attack over anything weak with Foretell-Me. What made M7 even better is that you could then rank it up again into Gaia Knight the Thundercharger. May 17th would be a day that would have huge implications for the game going forward, as it was the release of the Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy booster set. This set has a lot to go over, so we're going to have to skim a few cards. Starting off, we saw strong support for a lot of current existing decks. Gear was a trap card with the effect where you could special summon 2 Gear monsters from your deck and increase their levels by 1. You can only activate 1 Gear per turn. Gears had already been around for a while at this time, but they weren't a powerhouse of the format, and they were still a relatively new deck. A trap card that would give them immediate access to their favoured Exceeds and get the entire engine going, that was pretty huge for the deck. But as good as Gear was, it would be completely overshadowed by the stars of this pack. The Dragon Rulers, Blaster, Tidal, Tempest, Redox. These cards were absolute beasts, and they all had very similar effects. Blaster was the Fire Dragon ruler and had 2800 attack. If this card is in your hand or graveyard, you can banish a total of 2 Fire and /or Dragon type monsters from your hand and /or graveyard, except this card. Special summon this card. During your opponent's end phase, if this card was special summoned, return it to the hand. You can discard this card and 1 Fire monster to the graveyard, and target 1 card on the field. Destroy that target. If this card is banished, you can add 1 Fire Dragon type monster from your deck to your hand. You can only use 1 Blaster, Dragon Ruler of Inferno's effect per turn, and only once per turn. Tidal, Dragon Ruler of Waterfalls, represented the water attribute. If this card is in your hand or graveyard, you can banish a total of 2 water /and/or dragon type monsters from your hand and /or graveyard, except this card. Special summon this card. During your opponent's end phase, if this card was special summoned, return it to the hand. So as you can see, every Dragon Ruler had the same setup, where it could banish cards of its type or attribute to be special summoned. Going forward, I will be omitting this part from the Dragon Ruler effects. You can discard this card and 1 water monster to the graveyard. Send 1 monster from your deck to the graveyard. If this card is banished, you can add 1 water dragon type monster from your deck to your hand. Tempest was the wind attribute Dragon Ruler. You can discard this card and 1 wind monster to the graveyard. Add 1 dragon monster from your deck to your hand. If this card is banished, you can add 1 wind dragon monster from your deck to your hand. Once again, you can only use 1 effect per turn and only once that turn. Redox would be the Earth Dragon Ruler and would have the highest defense of all of them, sitting at 3000. You can discard this card and 1 Earth monster to the graveyard, then target 1 monster in your graveyard, special summon that target. If this card is banished, you can add 1 Earth Dragon type monster from your deck to your hand. So as you can see so far, these Dragon Rulers all have effects that synergize with their type or attribute. The problem of course being that for the discard effect, the Dragon Rulers are all different attributes, making it a bit harder to see those effects were solved. At least, that's what you'd think. Konami had clearly thought this through, and had given the deck a means to get those discard activations off easily. Introducing the Baby Dragon Rulers. Burner, Dragon Ruler of Sparks. A level 3 Fire Dragon monster with 1000 attack and 200 defense. You can discard this card and 1 Dragon or Fire monster. Special summon 1 Blaster, Dragon Ruler of Infernos from your deck. It cannot attack this turn. You can only use the effect of Burner, Dragon Ruler of Sparks once per turn. This effect to crit some of the Dragon Rulers from the deck would be universal across the Baby Dragon Rulers, with Stream fetching Tidal, Lightning fetching Tempest, and Rectan fetching Redox. The beauty of the Baby Rulers was they would not clog your hand. They could either be discarded for their own effects, or discarded for the effects of an adult Dragon Ruler. This made the deck incredibly consistent. The Dragon Rulers returning to hand might seem like a downside, but it really wasn't, as you could just use them as Xseed material. It just so happened that Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy had the perfect monster in mind for this deck. Mecha Phantom Beast Draco Sack. This rank 7 Wind Machine Xseed monster requires 2 level 7 monsters, in other words, 2 Dragon Rulers. Once per turn, you can detach 1 material from this card, special summon 2 Mecha Phantom Beast tokens. While you control a token, this card cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects. Once per turn, you can tribute 1 Mecha Phantom Beast monster, then target 1 card on the field. Destroy that target. This card cannot attack during the turn you activate this effect. So the Dragon Rulers got best of both worlds. Going second, it was an OTK engine. Going first, it had strong field control, with a monster that was hard to out. And as if the deck wasn't consistent enough already, it was further boosted by Sacred Sword of 7 stars. Banish 1 level 7 monster from your hand or face-up field, draw 2 cards. You can only activate 1 Sacred Swords per turn. So not only were you getting a draw off this, but then your Dragon Rulers were resolving their effects upon being banished, meaning you were plussing off the card. This deck was insanely consistent, and the crazy part is, it was never technically a tier 0 deck. We have 1 singular card to thank for that. Spellbook of Judgement is a quick play spell for the Spellbook archetype. During the end phase of the turn this card was activated, add Spellbook spell cards from your deck to your hand, except Spellbook of Judgement, up to the number of spell cards activated after this card's resolution. Then, you can special summon from your deck 1 Spellcaster type monster whose level is less than or equal to the number of cards added to your hand by this effect. You can only activate 1 Spellbook of Judgement per turn.
Oh my.
Let's work for this backwards. So it can special summon a spellcaster type monster directly from deck. Well, it can summon Yalgan the Spiritualist, a card that prevents special summons, or Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer, a card that prevents your opponent from banishing cards from either player's grave. So that alone makes it a very good card. But then they topped it off with a Super Rejuvenation style effect, where you add spellbook cards from your deck to your hand equal to the number of spellbook spell cards you'd use that turn. This card could make you easily go as much as plus 10. It was insane. Much like how the Dragon Rulers gave us monsters whose consistency was unheard of at this point, Spellbooker Judgement gave us a spell card whose consistency was also unheard of. It goes without saying, but Dragon Rulers and Spellbooks would completely leapfrog the meta and dominate the summer. But before we get there, we need to take a quick detour to some side sets. Releasing June 4 would be the release of Volume 3 of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Sexal manga. This manga would come with a promo card, Zombiestein. Zombiestein wouldn't have immediate impact on the game, but it saw enough play to get an inclusion here. Releasing 14th of June would be Super Starter, V for Victory. This would be a pretty standard starter deck, but it did include one new card of note, Crane. This level 3 Ring Beast monster had the effect where, when it's normal summoned, you can target one level 3 monster in your graveyard, special summon that target. Its effects are negated. This was Tour Guide of the Underworld, but for the graveyard, meaning it saw immediate play in any deck that utilised rank 3 monsters. Then finally on July 12th we would see the release of Number Hunters, a set dedicated to releasing as many Exceed and Number monsters into the game as possible. There wouldn't be any particular dominant card in this set, but many of them would see niche play over the years, and some of them even see play today. So with the stage set, we enter the beginning of the Dragon Ruler era, and the deck would see success immediately, winning the Oceania WCQ. Chris Mataske would run 3 of every adult Dragon Ruler and 2 of every baby Dragon Ruler. This use of all the Dragon Rulers would make the deck very discard heavy, making Super Rejuvenation the perfect tech. With Super Rejuvenation in play, it'd be easy for the Dragon Ruler player to immediately refill his hand at the end of the turn. As the months went on, Dragon Ruler lists would see a number of changes. The following month, Patrick Hoban would win the American WCQ. Hoban's list would differ quite significantly to the one that won the Oceania WCQ. The Dragon Ruler ratios would remain the same, but tech cards such as Explode the Dragon, Light and Darkness Dragon, and Swift Scarecrow would be dropped. Furthermore, the spell card lineup would be geared towards even more turbo plays, with 3 Sacred Sword of 7 Stars, 2 Gold Sarcophagus, and of course, the 3 Super Rejuvenation. Thanks to the toolboxing nature of the extra deck, Hoban didn't need to rely too heavily on main deck removal. Another innovation by Hoban would be main decking Vanity's Emptiness. Vanity's Emptiness would bring an immediate halt to the opponent's plays in the mirror match, and almost guarantee Hoban the win. Patrick Hoban would become well known for his deck building philosophy of going for pure consistency. This deck would just be the first of many examples. During this era of Yu-Gi-Oh!, Patrick Hoban would actually be one of the most influential players in the game. So Dragon Rulers were on a roll, sweeping up the top spots in almost every tournament, but there was one deck that could stand against it. The European WCQ would be won by Chris Bountalow's Spellbook Prophecy deck. In a format dominated by Dragon Rulers, Spellbooks was pretty much the only deck that could stop it. Some players would get cute and try and use Evil Swans, but Evil Swans didn't have the sheer stopping power of the Prophecy deck, or the consistency to prevent Dragon Rulers from making their plays. With 3 Spellbook of Judgement and the full Spellbook engine, it was easy to set up a nigh-on unkillable Yalgan the Spiritualist going first. Much like Vanity's Emptiness, this card prevented Dragon Rulers from making any plays. Spellbook Magician of Prophecy would be the normal summon that would give the deck its consistency, and Kaiku's the Ghost Destroyer graveyard interaction effects would just lock players out of the game. We would see the game devolve into a 2-deck format. You are either Team Dragon Rulers or Team Spellbooks, and this would be true going into World Season. The 2013 World Championship was hosted on August 10th to August 11th in Las Vegas. This tournament would be remembered for having 19 of the 26 players be on Dragon Rulers. Rulers would then go on to take up 6 of the top 8 spots. The World Championship would be run by Taiwanese player Wang Xin-en. En's build would introduce some new technology to the deck, most notably Dragon Raffine. Dragon Raffine would add to the engine by allowing En to send Eclipse Wyvern directly from his deck. The Eclipse Wyvern would then be banished by a Dragon Ruler, allowing him to search for Light and Darkness Dragon. The side deck also had a cool little tech in DNA Surgery. Using DNA Surgery allowed N to change all monsters on the field to a different type. In the case of the Spellbook matchup, he was able to change the types of all spellcasters, making the Spellbook engine no longer function. With players only having to prepare for 2 decks, it was very easy to make a side. As we can see, the side deck only consisted of 7 different cards, almost all of them ran in multiples. Taking the silver medal would be American player David Keener III. Keener would be one of the 7 players on Spellbook in this tournament. For this tournament, Keener opted to pre-side for the Dragon Ruler matchup. The use of double Yalgan the Spiritualist and Felix Ring Windblast were both ways to hit the Dragon Ruler engine. Another important card in this build would be Cursed Seal of the Forbidden Spell. This card was equally effective in both matchups. Cursed Seal of the Forbidden Spell functions much like Magic Jammer, but instead of just negating one copy of a spell card, it prevented your opponent from using that spell again for the rest of the duel. In the case of the Dragon Ruler matchup, it could permanently negate all copies of Super Rejuvenation or Sacred Sword of 7 Stars. In the Spellbook matchup it was even more killer, with players opting to win almost all of their spell cards at 3 copies. The side deck has unfortunately been lost to time, but in this build it was unimportant. 2 other cool techs in this build was the use of Defend the Magical Knight in the main, and the side option of Retort. When it came to the mirror matchup, Retort could negate pretty much any card the opponent activated, assuming that Keener had already used that spell card first. As usual, Konami would release a new set around the same time as Worlds, but of course, that set would not be legal to use during the World Championships. Judgement of the Light would release on August 8, 2013, and it scaled things back a fair bit from Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy. That said, this set still introduced many archetypes to the game, and supported many existing decks. It wasn't a groundbreaking set, nor did it have immediate impact on the meta, but it was a welcome addition to the game. Flying Sea is a level 3 Earth insect monster with 700 attack and 700 defense. Much like Maxi, this card was designed to be an anti-meta hand trap. When your opponent normal or special summons are monsters, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand to the opponent's field and defense position. The controller of this card cannot exceed summon. While this wasn't hitting Dragon Rulers, it was a pretty big hit to most other decks that were around at the time. If you were playing Synchros, you could get rid of it quite easily, but otherwise this card could represent a roadblock. Number 66, Master Key Beetle, is a rank 4 dark insect monster with 2500 attack and 800 defense. Requires 2 level 4 dark monsters. Once per turn, you can detach 1 Exceed material from this card, then target 1 card you control, except this card. While this card is face up on the field, that card cannot be destroyed by card effects. If this face-up card on the field would be destroyed, you can send one of its targets to the graveyard instead. Not the flashiest card, but its protection would help keep your boards established, and would become a key component to Infernity deck combos going forward. Star Eater is a light dragon level 11 generic synchro monster with 3200 attack and 2800 defense. Must be synchro summoned, and cannot be special summoned by other ways. This card's synchro summon cannot be negated. When synchro summoned, cards and effects cannot be activated. If this card attacks, it is unaffected by other card effects until the end of the damage step. Star Eater's effect wasn't insane, but as the first generic level 11, it would see immediate play just because it was a number you could now access with just 2 monsters. One of the new archetypes introduced in Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy would be Traptrix. Traptrix Mermello is a level 4 Earth insect monster with 1600 attack and 1200 defense. Unaffected by the effects of whole normal traps. When this card is normal summoned, you can add 1 whole normal trap from your deck to your hand. If this card is special summoned, target 1 spell trap card your opponent controls. Destroy that target. As you can tell from the effect, Traptrix was an archetype focused on the whole trap cards, such as Trap Hole, Bottomless Trap Hole, and the newly introduced Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare. When a monster that was special summoned this turn activates its effect on your opponent's field, negate that effect, and if you do, destroy that card. Traptrix wouldn't see many tops in 2013 due to the prevalence of Dragon Rulers, but the cards would see immediate inclusion in anti-meta and rogue strategies. Another archetype introduced in Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy would be Bujins. Bujin Yamato is a level 4 light beast warrior monster with 1800 attack and 200 defense. Once per turn, during your end phase, you can add one Bujin monster from your deck to your hand, then send one card from your hand to the graveyard. You can only control one Bujin Yamato. Bujin would focus on a defend the tower type strategy unlike any we had seen in the game previously. Every Bujin monster would be your focus on the field, while all the supporting monsters in the archetype would have trigger effects that would activate in the hand or graveyard. One such example would be Bujingi Crane, a light level 4 winged beast monster. During damage calculation, in either player's turn, if a Beast Warrior type Bujin monster you control battles an opponent's monster, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard. The attack of your monster becomes double its original attack during that damage calculation only. To put it short, Bujin was an archetype consisting of two monsters, Bujins and Bujingis. Bujingi Crane would have an honest-like effect, whilst other monsters in the archetype would replicate cards such as Necro Gardener. Much like Trap Tricks, this would immediately be seen as a rogue or anti-meta strategy. Finally, we would see a lot of new Fire Fist support in this set, the most important being Coach Soldier Wolfbar, a level 4 Fire Beast Warrior monster. You can target one level 4 Fire Beast Warrior monster in your graveyard, special summon it in defense position, but negate its effects. You can only use this effect of Coach Soldier Wolfbark once per turn. In short, this card was like a junk synchron for the archetype. Instead of making synchros, it was making rank 4 Exceeds. Since it was searchable with Fire Formation Tenki, it would be an essential inclusion in the deck. With World Season finally over, it was time for the post-World ban list. Going into this ban list, it was obvious some changes were needed to the game, and people were expecting many big hits.
Jesus!
What more needs to be said? This was one of the biggest Yu-Gi-Oh! Ban lists of all time. They didn't just take out Dragon Rulers and Spellbooks, but Konami saw it fit to hit every deck that would be a potential competitor in the upcoming format. So let's work our way backwards this time. We would see Unlimits to Agent of Mystery Earth, Destiny Hero Malicious, Tsukiyomi, A Hero Lives, Black Whirlwind, E-Emergency Call, Hieratic Seal of Convocation, Part of Duality, and Scapegoat. Plague Spreader Zombie, Masuki, TG Striker, Fire Formation Tenki, and Dimensional Prison would all be semi-limited. In Limited, we would have a massive 18 cards hit. Thunder King Ryo, Atlantean Dragoons, Brotherhood of the Fire Fist Spirit, Constellar Patelmi M7, Deep Sea Diva, Deloan, Tiger King of the Ice Barrier, Evergishki Mind Angus, Gen X Ally Birdman, Rescue Rabbit, Dimensional for Sure, Gold Sarcophagus, Royal Tribute, Bottomless Trap Hole, Compulsory Evacuation Device, Eradicator Epidemic Virus, Macro Cosmos, Soul Drain, and Torrential Tribute. Immediately we can see what some of the obvious hits are. Atlantean Dragoons and Deep Sea Diva would be massive losses for the Mermail strategy. Spirit would curtail Fire Fist after its Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy support. Deloan and Birdman would stop loop strategies. Rescue Rabbit going to 1 would pretty much kill Dino Rabbit. And Bottomless Trap Hole could be seen as an immediate response to Trap Tricks, if not just a general hit on what was then a very powerful card. Despite being heavy-handed on the limits, these were overall healthy limits to the game. And then we have Forbidden, with a staggering 15 cards. All 4 Baby Dragon Rulers would be forbidden. Elemental Hero Stratos would be forbidden, much to the anger of many. Number 16 Shockmaster would also go. Card Destruction, Gateway of the Six, Heavy Storm, Monster Reborn, Heart of Avarice, Spellbook of Judgement, Super Rejuvenation, Solemn Judgment, and Ultimate Offering would also say bye-bye to the game. While this list wasn't anywhere near as hated as the March 2012 list, it did leave players in a weird spot. Many of their decks were completely devastated by this list. But in terms of overall game health, it was probably for the better. Dragon Rulers would still be a strong deck. Spellbook of Judgment's ban would remove access to a card that, let's be honest, should have never been printed in the first place. Overall, a vicious but necessary ban list. However, Elemental Hero Stratos would long be seen as a casualty that was caught in the crossfire. To the surprise of no one, Dragon Rulers would bounce back immediately, with Edward Krang winning Rise CS Toronto with his new Rafine Ruler build. With the Baby Rulers now banned, the deck needed some new engine cards. Replacing the Baby Rulers would be 3 cards of Consonance, several Dragon Tuners, and Dragon Rafine. The combination of consonants and with theme would make it for all the speed lost. Going forward, these tuners would pretty much remain a key part of Dragon Ruler deck building. It wasn't just Dragon Rulers competing, however. Despite the hits to Diva and Dragoons, Mermail were able to bounce back, coming in second place that tournament. Soroshi's Sabian would replace the missing Dragoons and Divas with Aqua Spirit, a smart choice of tech card that would allow the deck to go into its rank 4 place easily. With the graveyard acting as a second hand in Dragon Rulers, having easy access to Abyss Dweller was key to winning. Sabian would unfortunately be unable to get past the final hurdle, but second place in a Dragon Ruler format was still very impressive. Continuing into Toronto's top deck list, in top 4 we would see Patrick Hoban return with his own version of Dragonity Ruler. This build would be heavily focused on the Dragonity engine, as Hoban maxed out on copies of Raffine. Hoban would continue to compensate for the deck's lost speed by including 3 copies of Upstart Goblin and 3 copies of Reckless Greed. By this time, cards such as Upstart Goblin had become synonymous with Patrick Hoban. When a deck such as Dragon Rulers has such a high damage output, it doesn't matter that your opponent is gaining an extra 3000 life points. Finishing top 4, we can see what would come to be the final Blackwing top for many years. When put next to the likes of Mermail and Dragon Rulers, this deck feels hilariously out of place, but it was a good meta call for that tournament. While the main deck consists mainly of cards from the 5Ds era, the extra deck made good use of many new Exceed monsters, in particular Abyss Dweller, Letharval Chain, and Master Key Beetle. The following months would see a slow trickle of new cards being introduced to the game, but there were 2 in particular that would have massive implications for the meta going forward. The first would be the release of the Saga of Blue Eyes White Dragon structure deck, and the inclusion of Dragon Shrine. Send 1 dragon monster from your deck to the graveyard, then, if that monster in your graveyard is a dragon normal monster, you can send 1 more dragon monster from your deck to the graveyard. You can only activate 1 Dragon Shrine per turn. In other words, a foolish burial for Dragon Rulers that could send 2 cards, namely Flamfell Guard and the Dragon Ruler. As good as Dragon Shrine was, it was completely dwarfed by this next card. 6th Sense is a very old card that was released in the early OCG era, but it was considered so powerful that Konami refused to release it in TCG. By 2013, however, they saw it fit to release it in the newly released Legendary Collection 4, Joey's World. Upon release, players knew this card was going to get banned, and it was immediately limited to 1, but they didn't care. They knew it would be a game changer for Dragon Ruler decks. The text on 6th Sense reads, declare 2 numbers from 1 to 6, then your opponent rolls a 6-sided die. After Assault is one of the numbers you declared, you draw that many cards. Otherwise, send a number of cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard equal to the Assault. For Dragon Rulers, this card was an absolute win-win. You could call 5 and 6, and then 1 or 2 things could happen. If the dice roll landed on 5 or 6, you drew that many cards. But if it didn't, well, you were just milling more Dragon Rulers to your graveyard. There was absolute no downside to this card at all in Dragon Ruler strategies. For people playing other strategies, its release was just an absolute slap in the face. And a slap in the face it would be. Following the release of 6th Sense, Patrick Ryder would take top spot at YCS London, England. The inclusion of 6th Sense was obvious, but otherwise not much changed in the deck. That said, Raider did have a nice little tech card in Trigon. Trigon wasn't seen as a card you would play for any particular reason, other than the fact that it was a fire dragon monster. Outside of Dragon Rulers, Trigon has not seen any play before or since. Also, a quick side note, while not a 6th Sense build, YCS San Mateo, California would be run by Merlin Schumacher. I want to highlight this Dragon Ruler build because of one particular card that was used in the side deck, Magical Ref Panel. Magical Ref Panel is a card I overlooked in past years, and it's easy to forget it exists, but it has a very unique effect. Activate only when a spell card that targets one player is activated. The effect of that spell card is applied to the other player instead. What does this mean? Well, if your opponent activates Card of Consonance or Sacred Sword of 7 Stars, and you chain Magical Ref Panel, you are the player drawing the 2 cards, not your opponent. This made it a very cute side decking card, considering many Dragon Ruler players were maxing out on Cards of Consonance, Sacred Swords, and even Upstart Goblin. November would bring forth the release of 2013's final set, with Shadow Specters releasing on November 8th. Konami chose to go with a Halloween theme for this set's marketing. This was to match the inclusion of the new Ghost Trick archetype. Ghost Trick Lantern is a dark level 1 monster with 800 attack and 0 defense. Cannot be normal summoned unless you control a Ghost Trick monster. Once per turn, you can change this card to face down defense position. When an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, or when a Ghost Trick monster you control is targeted for an attack, you can negate the attack, and if you do, special summon this card from your hand in face down defense position. The Ghost Trick monsters would have varying effects, but one thing that was consistent with all of them is that you could not normal summon them unless you already controlled a Ghost Trick monster. The deck's strategy revolved around playing your monsters set in defense position. All the accompanying spell and traps would trigger when your opponent tried to attack or interact with set monsters. Ghost Tricks would see some niche play, but it was more of a gimmick strategy than anything else. But it did bring us a pretty significant Exceed monster for the time. Ghost Trick Alucard is a rank 3 dark zombie monster with 1800 attack and 1600 defense, requires 2 level 3 monsters. Monsters your opponent controls cannot target face-up Ghost Trick monsters or any face-down defense position monsters for attacks, except this one. You can detach 1 Exceed material from this card, then target 1 set card your opponent controls, destroy that target. You can only use this effect of Ghost Trick Alucard once per turn. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target 1 other Ghost Trick card in your graveyard, add that target to your hand. Ghost Tricks may not have been the strongest deck, but many of its cards would be neat techs in other strategies, Ghost Trick Alucard being the main one of them. White Dragon River Buster and Black Dragon Collapse Serpent would be support for the Chaos Dragon strategy. River Buster was a light dragon monster with 1700 attack and 1800 defense. Collapse Serpent, on the other hand, would be a dark dragon with 1800 attack and 1700 defense. Both these cards cannot be normal summoned or set. They must be special summoned by banishing a light monster from the graveyard for Collapse Serpent and a dark monster from the graveyard for River Buster. You can only special summon each of these monsters once per turn this way. If either card is sent to the graveyard, you can add the other from your deck to your hand. These two cards didn't fit into the then Dragon Baller strategies due to their attributes, but to the surprise of no one, they would come to see heavy play in future Dragon strategies. Speaking of, Mythic Water Dragon was a level 8 Water Dragon with 1000 attack and 2000 defense. If you control an Earth monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can only special summon Mythic Water Dragon once per turn this way. This card would then be paired with Mythic Tree Dragon, a level 4 Earth Dragon monster with 100 attack and 1400 defense. Once per turn, you can target 1 Water Dragon type monster you control. This card becomes the current level of that monster. Putting these two cards together would give you access to rank 8 Exceed plays, which was fitting because Shadow Specters would contain the Exceed monster, the Fine Dragon Knight Felgrand. This is a rank 8 light warrior monster with 2800 attack and 1800 defense. Requires 2 level 8 monsters. Once per turn, during either player's turn, you can detach 1 Exceed material from this card, then target 1 face-up monster on the field. This turn, its effects are negated, but is unaffected by other card effects. Felgrand was a fantastic utility card, much in the same way something like Book of Moon was. It could be used both offensively and defensively. It could either negate your opponent's monster's effects, or it could protect your own monsters from your opponent's cards by negating their own effects. The negation downside wasn't really a downside at all. Mistake was a continuous trap with the effect that neither player could add cards from their deck to their hand except by drawing them. A very simple floodgate effect, essentially making it the trap version of Thunder King Ryo. Finally, we have number 65, Gym Buster. This rank 2 Dark Fiend monster requires 2 level 2 Dark monsters. When your opponent activates a monster effect, you can detach 2 materials from this card to negate the activation, and if you do, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. This card saw very niche play back then, but anyone who's playing the modern advanced format will be more familiar with it now. Therefore, it is worth an inclusion. Going into December, we would see the year finish off with Rise CS Turin in Italy. Samuel Pedigo would buck the trend of Dragon Ruler dominance, with his Gear Karakuri deck coming in first place. Thanks to the release of Gear earlier in the year, the deck was able to easily put out materials for Synchro and Exceed plays. With a focus of mono-type anti-meta strategies, this was very much a modernised version of the Gadget deck. With the deck not needing to banish cards, the inclusion of 3 Imperial Iron War made too much sense. It just completely locked out Dragon Ruler plays. Gear Gears may not have been seen as a top strategy, but on this day, it was the correct meta call. Following the release of Shadow Specters, we would see its immediate influence on the Dragon Ruler decks. Mythic Tree and Mythic Water Dragon would fit neatly into the strategy, and help the deck get easier access to the rank 8 plays that it was doing previously. Other than that, it was a standard build that used Battle Fader as a neat tech. And that brings us to the end of 2013. Oh, and as a side note, you probably noticed I've included Noble Knight cards in most of the set releases for the past 2 years, but I have never talked about them. Unfortunately, Noble Knights represent something of a missed opportunity for the game at the time. Having played myself during that period, I remember there was a lot of hype behind Noble Knights, especially as a TCG exclusive deck. People really wanted it to be good, but it just never hit it off. It managed a few tops, but compared to everything else that came out in the era, the deck just couldn't cut it. So as a consolation, I have included these cards in the set releases, even though I will never actually talk about them in great detail. Those of you who have played in more modern times, however, will know that that one day changed. For this series, however, they were unfortunately not relevant enough to talk about. So join us next time for 2014, a year that is known for once again changing Yu-Gi-Oh! Forever. See ya.